Mayor Buttigieg, thank you so much for your time.
Good to be with you. Thanks for coming over.
You've said that the Trump administration's policy towards immigrants is inhumane, and yet we do have a real problem at the U.S.-Mexico border. So, as president, what does an effective border policy look like to you?
An effective border policy is one that manages the border in accordance with our laws and in accordance with our values. That means recognizing that asylum seekers are working within their legitimate rights. It means keeping families together, and it means having a real reform process so that we can deal with the fact that there are millions of people without status here in the United States. This is not the first time that we've seen this level of migration, but it is the first time that we've seen this level of cruelty and incompetence that have come together to create an inhumane situation at the border that is a stain on America's moral authority and a real harm for countless families.
Earlier this year, President Trump called on Congress to get rid of immigration judges. Doesn't sound like that would be an effective system, at least based on what you're talking about.
We already have a huge problem with backlogs at the border. When I am president, we will be sending more, not fewer, resources to make sure that these cases can be heard and dealt with quickly. We also need to change some of the processes, move this into an administrative process that can smoothly handle everything from asylum claims to applications for citizenship. The process is bureaucratic, and you add to that the just total cruelty of tearing children out of the arms of their parents, and it adds up to a disaster at the border. Remember, this president got elected promising that he would bring order and calm and solutions to the border. On his watch, we have seen the exact opposite.
And we've just learned that the president has told, at least we've heard that the president has told some folks in his administration, I will pardon you if you must break the law in order to get this border wall completed before the 2020 election. What's your response?
This is criminal. To encourage somebody to commit a crime and say that it'll be okay because you'll pardon them, is that really what this has come to? Is that how naked the criminal behavior of this presidency has become? The idea, first of all, that we are diverting dollars. First they look to steal dollars from Pentagon budgets, now they're trying to take it away from FEMA. Is this really the time to be diverting money away from emergency management in order to support this president's cruel policies at the border? This is no way to run this country, and it's no way to run our immigration policy.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. We know that Puerto Rico looks like it's about to get walloped again by another hurricane. They've had a lot of problems even before Hurricane Maria in 2017. You're saying that that's just cruel and unusual treatment to Puerto Rico, but where should the administration get the money they say they need to create a better situation at the border?
Well, for one thing, our priorities in spending should reflect the priorities of this country. That means less for a border wall that's never going to get completed anyway. And also making sure that the biggest companies in this country are paying their fair share. The president created $1 trillion hole in the budget with tax cuts for corporations and the wealthiest. What business do they have now saying, how are we going to pay for this or how are we going to pay for that? When we are talking about Puerto Rico, we are talking about fellow U.S. citizens. And when the president verbally attacks Puerto Rico, he's attacking America.
Perhaps the most urgent global economic crisis right now is a slowing economy and President Trump's escalating trade war with China. As president, what would you do to create a better trade relationship with Beijing?
Well, first of all, the president has no strategy, and it shows. When I'm president, we will seek to make sure that U.S. workers, farmers, and consumers benefit from our trade policy with respect to China or any other country in the world. Right now, instead of a strategy, you just see the president poking China in the eye with tariffs, and the result is they poke back. That's got serious consequences. Farmers who grow soybeans close to where I live, consumers who are going to be paying more. In fact, the average American could be facing $500 to $1,000 more in costs this year alone. And I don't know where we're supposed to get it. Just from higher prices created by tariffs, which are a form of taxes that the president is imposing. And the whole idea of this, I thought, was to generate a deal. We are long past when he promised we would get a China deal. There is no deal because, like every other promise this president has made, he is incapable of delivering.
But Mr. Mayor, the president insists we're taking in billions from China. Are you calling him a liar?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, he's known for not telling the truth, and this is a good example. A tariff is a tax, and that tax is paid by Americans whenever they purchase anything. This is a matter of simple fact. The bigger picture here is that if we want to get China to change its behavior, it's going to take a lot more than poking them with some tariffs. We have to invest in our domestic competitiveness right here in the United States, or we will continue to get left behind as the other countries of the world figure out how to make progress without us.
Let's shift to healthcare. Are you in favor of restoring Obamacare, replacing it with single payer, something different? What does healthcare look like to you under your administration?
So my administration will deliver what we call Medicare for all who want it. In other words, if we're going to get to universal healthcare, let's do it in a way that gives Americans the freedom to choose. We will take something resembling Medicare, make it available as a public alternative on the exchanges, and invite people to be able to buy in. But it's an alternative to just saying we can throw a switch, kick 130 million Americans off their private plans and expect that to work. If we want to get to universal coverage in this country, let's do it in a way that allows Americans to vote with their feet. I believe that our public plan will be better than any of the corporate alternatives out there, but instead of having to take my word for it, we will see whether it actually outcompetes the private options.
Okay. For the first time this year, the Defense Department briefed reporters. They talked a lot about Afghanistan. Would our troops still be in that country during your first term as president?
You know, when I left Afghanistan, and that was years ago, I thought I was one of the last troops turning out the lights, and we're still there. We have to bring an end to this engagement as it's approaching the 20-year mark. And that means a political settlement that allows us to get out while still preserving our security and making sure that we don't lose the gains that we've made. My goal will be to end our involvement as quickly as possible. If we need some special operations capability or intelligence capabilities, we do it in many places around the world to keep Americans safe. That's one thing, but an open-ended commitment of troops on the ground with no clear endgame cannot be allowed to continue because it's gone on for far too long.
That's a good one. From your people. So you recently protested with Uber and Lyft drivers here in California. They're calling for better wages, you recently protested with Uber and Lyft drivers here in California. They're demanding more rights and higher pay. So what does that look like in this so-called gig economy?
Well, the fundamental reality of the gig economy is that a gig is still a job, and a person working a gig is still a worker. So why wouldn't we allow them to be protected as such? I want these companies to succeed, but they have to find a way to do it that doesn't rely for their business model on squeezing workers and denying them the protections you would have if you were a regular employee. If you're driving for Uber, then you work for Uber, and they can invent any number of legal fictions to pretend that's not the case, but it's a simple reality that I think most of us already get. It's just that the law doesn't reflect it. It's why I support measures like AB 5 and a national policy.
Assembly Bill 5 here in California.
That's right, and it would clear up that if you're being called a contractor, but for all practical purposes you're actually a worker, then you should be protected like a worker with minimum wage and protections against sexual harassment and the opportunity to form a union. These are basic tenets of being in the workforce in America, and as we continue to move in the future toward an environment where a lot of people will be working in these gig economy employers, we got to make sure we hold those employers accountable for the standards of their workers.
A lot of people are in favor of strong unions, and yet some workers are calling for at least $30 an hour if they're driving for Uber or Lyft. Is that realistic? And I'm not trying to be sympathetic to these companies that make oodles and oodles of money, but is $30 an hour realistic?
Well, it's going to depend on the different geographies and the realities of the different jobs. But what we know is you need to be able to make a living wage, and you need to be able to make a decent living when you are working. The fact that this country, the most prosperous, we would like to think, the most prosperous, democratic, forward-thinking country in the world, the fact that you can work full-time and be poor in this country just doesn't make sense. And as we're debating where the economy is headed, wondering whether it's going to go into recession, the bigger issue is even when the economy's been growing, many Americans have seen their income, their economic situation get worse. We cannot allow that to continue.
You got time for two more guys?
We're right at 10 minutes.
Okay, let me do one more. Well, I'll just ask. Russia. What do we do to contain the threat of Russia?
Well, we have to deter Russia from continuing to interfere with us. Obviously, they're not very worried now because the administration and the Republican Senate have shown no interest in actually securing our elections. But our democracy is the most important thing we've got. If you can attack it and get away with it, that weakens our national security incalculably. It's why when I am president, Russia will know that we will use our diplomatic, intelligence, cyber, and economic capabilities to deter them so that they would never think it was worth it to try to interfere with our elections again.